We have a fireside chat now for you. It's a fireside chat on corporate governance in the PEVC ecosystem, the good, the better. And we have, two powerful women, one from the legal ecosystem and another from the investing ecosystem, sharing their thoughts with us. So I would like to introduce our first person, Ms. Zia Modi. She's the co-founder and managing partner of AZB and Partners, and is one of India's foremost corporate attorneys. She is widely acknowledged for her expertise and ranks as number one in Fortune India's 50 most powerful women in business list in 2018 and 19, and has been consistently ranked in the top 10 since 2011. According to RSG India report, clients praise Zia as a problem solver. She is meticulous, thorough, and accessible, and comes highly recommended for any complex legal matter. She is duly licensed to practice law in India and the US, holding an LLM from Harvard and having passed the New York State Bar. Sharing thoughts from the investment ecosystem on corporate governance is, in this conversation, Ms. Nupur Garg. She is the founder of WinPE, a not-for-profit initiative to enhance gender diversity in the investing ecosystem. She was also listed in Forbes Women Power list of self-made women in 2020 among India's top 100 women leaders in finance. Awarded the Women Empowerment Entrepreneur Award in 2019-20 and the Business Excellence and Innovative Best Practices Academia Award in 2019. She serves as an independent director on the boards of multiple companies and sits on the investment committee of multiple funds. In her last full-time role, she led the private equity venture capital funds business in the region for IFC. With that, I would like to welcome Zia and Nupur on board on the stage to share thoughts with you. Thank you. Welcome, Nupur. Welcome, Zia.
Thank you, Rohan. And Zia, welcome to this conversation. It's such a pleasure to be chatting with you here. And when we start thinking about corporate governance and the regulatory landscape from an LP's point of view, I can't think of a better person than you to shed light on some of the burning questions that I'm sure many LPs have. I have those questions myself, so I can't wait to jump right into it.
Thank you, Nupur. I think that it's a pleasure to be on a panel with you. For the audience that's out there, you should know that Nipur carries out a cause close to my heart, which is to increase the participation of women in the in the PE space. So for all of you watching there, make sure you support her. Go ahead, Nupur.
Thank you, Zia. So, Zia, first question. When the AIF regulations were launched in India, it really opened the way and the path for domestic capital to be pooled and for capital to be pooled domestically in India. And then we've seen the regulator, SEBI, sort of be pretty active and pretty proactive in bringing amendments and in making changes, etc. But as a global investor who wants to invest in India and who's maybe, say, used to looking at MAS in Singapore or the SEC in the US, how would you say that the current environment in India stacks up against, say, the SEC in terms of saying, yes, this fund manager is governed by the AIF regulations, and therefore we can assume that a certain level and a certain standard of transparency and governance exists. So, what is it that LPs can really start drawing comfort from?
So I think it's fair to say, Nupur, I'm sure you'll agree that SEBI has been pushing hard for more disclosure, more transparency, more accountability at the investment manager level for all the AIFs. And I think we certainly have traveled a long way, especially in the last 5 years. So if you look at it today, SEBI has put out a standardized PPM that they expect you to follow. And that has a fair amount of rigorous disclosures about the key people in the team, the investment manager, basically disclosures about the track record, and various things which will give an insight that was not there before. Let's put it that way. The next thing is that they've also started recognizing the concept of sophisticated investors, where you can get accredited. And then if that is the case, SEBI has, like other global regulators, also accepted that the sophistication and the wherewithal that you have to invest allows the manager then to allow you to take more risk. and the ppm can be varied, so to speak. But I was told by our funds team that even when that is happening, SEBI is still pushing back and asking for the base disclosures to try and be met. So I think there's a lot of progress that has been made. Have we reached the sophistication yet of an American disclosure document? Perhaps not. But I think that certainly global pools of capital are coming in. You've seen the rush with which the funds space has been active. And so I would say that we are doing a good job as the regulator. And I think the comfort level of the global LPs is surely increasing. Even then, you've seen some funds have had multiple rounds of exits and then fresh rounds of investment. So there's a sense of comfort in that. You usually used to see earlier large LPs investing offshore and coming in as a fund of funds very often. You're now seeing sovereigns and other private equity investing directly into Indian funds, which again shows a leap of faith and an assurance of the track record to come. So I would say we are doing reasonably well, cautiously
That's
optimistic.
That's good to know, Zia, because there is frequently this debate on whether SEBI is getting too conservative and whether we are able to maintain the right balance. I think it's also a function of the maturity of the industry per se, and how that itself I think is much younger as compared to say a market like the US.
But
Um,
Indians learn quickly, if nothing else. And I think that our domestic managers have understood what it takes to attract global LPs. And they are not going to be wanting in their efforts to attract that pool of capital. So I think it's a two-way convergence of what the LPs want and what the managers are stepping up to provide.
That's fantastic, Zia. Because they say you should never have a secret from your lawyer, and if a lawyer is saying that good practices are in place in the market, I think we can all draw a lot of comfort from that. So, just moving this conversation forward, Zia, if we start getting into the nuances and specifics of LPs who want to invest in India, what would you say are the key issues that they should look out for, either in terms of regulations or market practice or industry practice? And when we are thinking of these issues, are there any concerns which are related to say the judicial environment or enforceability, and this increasing desire to maybe have India as a seat of arbitration or have India as potentially a jurisdiction?
So I think that, some of the things that are happening, which the LPs are also probably pushing for, is when you have a sovereign wealth fund or well, the pension funds, you know that now the exemptions have come in from a tax perspective, the dividend exemption, the pass-throughs. So that has become a more attractive place from a tax perspective for a certain type of LP. The next thing is that you have been seeing certain type of activism through the regulator. So you have no fault terminations of the fund. For example, if you have a change of control of the manager in excess of 50%, then you either need the consent of 75% or you have to give them exit rights, so to speak. So LPs, I think, are getting comfortable that they can negotiate documents with the underlying soft help of the regulator, which get them to a place where they feel they can hold the manager accountable, and therefore they have a sense of assurance that if something goes terribly wrong, they're not going to be in a situation where they have no recourse. That, coupled with the history that our domestic managers are now providing to the global LPs, is very important. And of course, some of the traditional LPs have become direct investors themselves, which tell the whole story, right? So, right from becoming a fund of funds to becoming platform investors, you see so many LPs which are willing to take a leap of faith with managers. And so they have, just a CPPIB coming in with a couple of partners or other funds who are willing to go with one dominant manager. and forging relationships which are more like a JV in real sense, but also allowing large amounts of foreign capital to come in through the AIF structure, all with, I suppose, some sort of mental assurance that life can't go horribly wrong.
That's great to know. And while we are on this, I was just wondering if you could share some of the best practices that you are now seeing adopted in India. And I have always thought that a lot of the terms that the regulators are starting to provide for as part of the regulations have been something that LPs are generally, quite proactive in instituting in the documents and in negotiating for. I mean, you mentioned that change of control provision. It's a pretty standard ask from most sophisticated and experienced LPs. So, do you think if we sort of step back and step outside what is inside the regulations, which to a certain extent could be the obvious terms and clauses that most institutional LPs ask for. If we step outside that framework and just look at how market and the maturity of the industry and the fund managers is driving this forward, um, are there any changes or new practices that you're starting to see being adopted?
So I think one of the things that is looked at carefully is the conflict of interest and how to deal with that. So
Hmm.
if you have, for example, a fund manager, which is a large conglomerate and has a fund silo as well, an investing silo as well, how do they deal with who they invest in? Who are their targets?
Yeah.
What is the LP's version of a conflict of interest? How does it get elevated into a independent committee? And then how does that then go down to the various targets?
Right.
One of the classics I always remember was the Tata Opportunities Fund, where the mission of the Tata Opportunities Fund was to invest in Tata companies.
Hmm.
And the LPs had such trust in the name Tata that was an accepted position. And they were comforted that as a manager, Tata would do the right thing by the LPs. Now, that is maybe, exceptional because it is brand Tata. But even in other cases, the way conflicts of interest are dealt with is getting more refined. I think the no cause removal of the Indian manager is another thing that LPs are pushing on. Indian managers don't like to be removed without cause. And the pushback, of course, is the LP say, we won't remove you. But if we do, we don't have to get into a litigation as to whether it is for cause or not for cause. We will
Yeah.
want the no cause removal. And just as we trust you, you will have to trust us to do the right thing. So that has now become a pushback and is part of global market practice, which the LPs are trying to push into India. Again, allocation of co-investment rights. That's
Hmm.
another thing we are seeing. So that if LPs want to co-invest, then the pushback is no fees and no carry for the co-investment portion. The manager, of course, is seeing that little pot of income go away, but then it allows him to allocate or her to allocate more at the fund level and then only go to the LPs for co-invest if it is either too large or not diversified enough, etc., etc. So I think that the Abrar situation I think has caused a lot of reaction into how the LPs want to control or have more say over the life and the duties and the behavior of the investment manager than before. And I see that coming into the documentation in India as well. It's still bespoke, it's still
Hmm.
pushback, still who has the larger negotiation in the room. But I think it's happening. And if the investment manager is terminated, there are now haircuts being negotiated on the carry. So the investment manager cannot walk away with past full carry, and there are consequences of termination. I see these sort of clauses coming into play.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you, Zia. I actually now want to pick up something slightly different, but in the context of creating the ecosystem that the government wants to. I wanted to talk about the gift city. And when I was at IFC, one of the first things we did when we looked at a fund was the jurisdiction. There were a lot of concerns about offshoring, and the whole peer review process was applied to different jurisdictions. There were some who were peer reviewed, some were approved, so there were different categories and different levels of risks associated, etc. So when we look at how gift city is coming up, um, and creating a business environment for fund managers to maybe create an offshoring industry there, how do you think the structure of the gift city maybe stacks up against, um, say the same peer review process that I referred to earlier, or the OECD concerns about tax leakages, etc. And how does that structure enable transparency and strong governance?
So the jury is out yet, Nupur, as you know, but I think that we've seen a lot of interest on setting up an AIF in Gift City. I think the only concern is what happens to the status of Gift City if the government changes. But assuming that the government does not change and is continuing to be supportive, it's really a special economic zone, right? It is basically you are in the gift city, you are resident, but not you're deemed to be not a resident of India. But what is happening is that I think there will be substance requirements that the government will require, just like a Singapore. And today, if you look at it, given that Mauritius has not yet got clearance and Cayman has not yet got clearance, the main offshore jurisdiction is Singapore.
Yeah.
Singapore itself could be expensive compared to a gift city presence.
Yeah.
And so I think this gift city will gain more acceptability. A couple of people have to start, but I think they will get good exemptions on GST and the other exemptions that they will get. You'll have to have people residing or working out of gift city, which is the substance test. But I think, there will be a strict regulatory regime. It's not as if it's going to be leakage in that sense. Indian government isn't going to allow any significant leakage. But it will enable, I think, an alternate geographical special economic zone. We will have
Hmm.
to see to what extent the FDI provisions are imported into the investments that are made. But absent that, I think it would be a good alternative for global managers to see if they want to access this market through this process.
And how would it differ for LPs to say if the fund should be based in Gift City or in, say, Singapore?
So the first thing is a domestic AIF can't really leverage itself as much. Whereas an AIF sitting in Gift City could probably take back end financing. That would be
Hmm.
one important differentiator. Second is in a normal AIF, it's difficult to have co-investment rights directly from LPs coming in. Whereas in the Gift City AIF, that could be a possibility. Cost
Sure.
wise, I would think that it would be cheaper for a Gift City AIF as opposed to a Singapore AIF. These, I think, would be the three issues.
Agree. I've just been reminded that we don't have too much time. So I do want to ask that big question on corporate governance in general, Zia. So, recent years have seen a fair bit of corporate and boardroom scandals, including in PVC backed companies, and that has resulted in erosion of value to investors. So, how do you see corporate governance standards evolving in India through regulations, through practice in boardrooms, and amongst promoters and founders as they start to experience and learn from these experiences? And how would you say the governance arrangement of PVC backed companies has started to evolve? How have investors now started to, look at what they need from their companies in terms of governance?
So I think the PE industry itself has learned from its bad experiences. And The targets have learned that if they want serious money and large checks, they need to be good boys and girls. The first, as I always say, is fear is good. Everything starts with fear, and nobody now wants their name on the front page of the newspapers for the wrong stuff. So the reputational requirement has now sunk in to almost all the target companies that the private equity industry invests in. Moreover, what is happening is that because of so private equity invests to get an exit, and the exit has to be profitable. If the exit is not profitable, everybody is losing. I've heard that now promoters themselves are getting reserve shares, which vest over a period of time, which forces good behavior and forces value creation. The other thing, of course, is that a lot of the PEs are now insisting that the target companies covenant and sign up to ESG and to other issues that would make the company more valuable. I don't think they are yet enforcing actual ESG on the ground in a granular
Mm-hmm.
basis. That will come.
Mm-hmm.
But they are certainly taking covenants that they commit their target companies to sign up to this behavioral change. And ultimately, I think that the promoters, if they really want to get the benefit of the check that the private equity boys have written, the idea has to be good governance because now it is well established that that gets you better value. So it's a lose lose to think you can cut corners, take shortcuts. And I think that the private equity space has really changed the mindset of the promoters of the target companies because they realize that simply the quarter on quarter profits is not the end all and be all. Because if it's found that you got the profits the wrong way, the decline is very steep. And once the private equity boys lift their foot off the table from you, nobody's touching you after that. And so the
That's
fear of being a pariah, of losing your reputation, of not being part of the Me Too group, and wanting the value creation. I think all of these, and then ultimately, if you behave well, you feel good. And that's the best feeling of all, right? So rich and good. And I think that that's what the private equity industry is pushing to tell the target companies. Promoters have changed their mindset, is my sense. We act for the promoters sometimes, we act for the PE boys and girls sometimes. And I think the promoters are quite aligned that the path forward post the investment is good governance. And what we always advise them is when in doubt, ask. Don't
yeah.
take call that you think will please a substantial minority. And in some cases, as you know now, more often, the PE industry is doing buyouts. So then the governance is in their hands. They can't point to the
Absolutely.
promoter.
Yeah. Absolutely. Zia, I would love to carry this conversation on. I did want to go back to the discussion on Abraj a little bit, but I recognize we are out of time. And maybe I can talk about Abraj with you offline. But for the purposes of this session, thank you so much, Zia, for sharing your thoughts and your expertise. It has been a pleasure picking your brains. Thank you.
For being a great moderator. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Zia, and thanks, Nupur. On behalf of IVC as well, I would want to convey our thanks. Thanks for sharing these insights with us. Thank you so much.